Okay, so today is Tuesday, November 26, 2024, and patience, my friend, sometimes pays off. Now listen, I want to be very careful here because I realize that you may very well own shares of Bitfarms, and hey, from your perspective at this point, you just want the stock to go up. I get that. But as I've alluded to, hey, sometimes patience can pay off. Bitfarms, as of right now, market's about 4 to 5 minutes away from closing, is trading under $2 a share. Now, granted, every company practically in the publicly traded Bitcoin mining ecosystem is trading down today. Price of Bitcoin is down. So we have a scenario where if nothing has really changed insofar as, right, hey, the potential for Bitcoin to become a strategic reserve asset of the United States, if it continues to be true that Bitcoin has all of the many attributes that we've talked about time and time again, right? If nothing has fundamentally changed, aside from the fact that, hey, the price of Bitcoin has fluctuated downwards somewhat, if that's the only thing that's changed, but all of the other, basic fundamentals, if you want to call them that, remain intact, then I think what we're seeing right now in at least certainly shares of Bitfarms seems a bit overdone. Now, I get it. I've heard from a couple of people who are like, hey man, the thing you got to really understand about Bitfarms, and I'm paraphrasing what they've told me, and I've independently confirmed some of this, but you tell me, how accurate or not this is, right? Hey, year to date, Bitfarms has sold upwards of $250 million worth of stock to fund various operational projects. That's a lot of stock, okay? And you tell me in the comments, hey, is that accurate? I think it's about 240 million, 250, somewhere in there. And then the question becomes, hey, how much additional dilution has to occur to fully fund additional growth plans? And at that point, where do you see a stock price when, right, dilution just keeps on happening more and more and more and more? You could have a company that has a phenomenally efficient fleet of Bitcoin mining machines. You could have a company that has just operations that are amazing, that are like really efficient, and, the latest, greatest of everything, a phenomenal business, but at the cost of, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of dilution, which then, hey, any positive results that the business is able to achieve, well, what does it mean for shareholders then who see their share of the business slowly but surely kind of being diluted away, right? Does it mean that the stock just, becomes like sort of like a zombie stock, where you're just kind of stuck like in this morass of like, man, we trade in the high ones and the low twos, and maybe we get up to the threes, but then we kind of get pushed back down again. Somebody mentioned, hey man, like you ought to take a look at, the short interest and like what effect short selling might have on shares of Bitfarms. So I took a look at the information published on the WSJ.com website, that's the Wall Street Journal, and I'm saying this from memory, but I believe that there were something like, I forget the exact number of millions of shares that are shorted. It might have been in the $40-ish million range, and it correlated with about, I think, like 11% of the float. So, and that's as of, I think it was October 31st, 2024. Now, needless to say, right, hey, the stock gets shorted, eventually those shares need to be repurchased. I think anybody who's betting on Bitfarms going to zero is going to be sorely mistaken, right? Because, if you're in a position where you could just endlessly sell stock, your own stock, to fund operations, it's kind of hard to ever really hit zero in some ways, although, yes, you do get to a point where you've just got a bazillion shares out there, which actually Bitfarms is kind of getting close to that bazillion range, right? Aren't there over like a billion shares outstanding? I remember Bitfarms has been a public company for many, 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 many years. One of the original, in fact, the first, right, publicly traded Bitcoin mining company. So, there's a bit of history there. The point is, okay, hey, there's enthusiasm and optimism with regard to Bitcoin. There's enthusiasm and optimism with regard to what Bitcoin can become. There's, I think, legitimate enthusiasm and excitement about what the U.S. federal government may do with regard to creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But does that enthusiasm and excitement necessarily have to extend specifically to shares of Bitfarms as compared to shares of CleanSpark or Marathon or Iris Energy or fill in the blank, right? Or, an ETF, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what kind of concerns me, right? Now there are so many different ways to play the price of Bitcoin. There are so many different avenues that capital can pursue in an effort to gain exposure, right? Leveraged exposure in many cases, in some cases, right? To the price of Bitcoin that, hey, how does investor capital ever find its way to a company like Bitfarms? And I think that's ultimately going to be a challenge that, current Bitfarms management is going to have to, rise to the occasion to figure out. Hey, how do we create a compelling story? How do we create a compelling investment thesis? How do we create a differentiated product? Because in a way, yeah, when you mine Bitcoin, you don't really have traditional customers, right? Your customers, I think, to paraphrase what another publicly traded Bitcoin mining company has said, you're sort of like your customers are kind of then your shareholders in many ways. So, how does Bitfarms create a compelling story to invite and attract potential new shareholders? Now, from my perspective, right, just, from a very simplistic, I think, strategy perspective, step one is to sort of like hold on to the shareholders you've currently got. You don't want to keep losing shareholders, right? So you want to kind of like reinvigorate the investor base. Hey, give everybody like a real sense that this is where we're going. This is what we're going to do. We're going to hit our targets this time, every time, like we're really going to be solid on execution. Again, easier said than done. I get that. Create some real enthusiasm, right, amongst current shareholders so that at least you can kind of stop the erosion of people deciding, forget it, I'm out of this name. There are better names out there. And I've read this in the comments and I get it. I do get it. Hey, I'm going to buy shares of Marathon. Right? I mean, they've got a massive hodl. Hey, I want to be involved with CleanSpark, whatever. I get it. So, Bitfarms is going to really have to position itself in a manner that ultimately attracts capital to its shares because there's a lot of different ways people can gain exposure to Bitcoin price appreciation. But what is it about Bitfarms that makes Bitfarms unique, that makes Bitfarms stand out? And because I'm not sitting in the leadership team having these active discussions, I don't really have an active answer for you either. Okay? It's just one of those deals. But I do think that now more than ever, that's going to be crucial. It's not enough to say, hey, you know what? Our results will speak for themselves. Yeah, who's even listening? That's the dilemma. You can have phenomenal results, right? But if nobody's really paying attention or they're distracted or they're looking at this or looking at that, it's like you could be, doing just amazing things and nobody really knows, right? So it's a challenge. And as I said, I don't have a really good answer, but I'm curious if you might have an answer or a suggestion. Something that I do truly believe is that we probably need 3 to 4 publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies. In other words, I do think this industry needs to be consolidated. I really believe that. And, to the extent Riot platforms, are they even still called Riot platforms? Did they truncate their name to just Riot, kind of like Marathon Digital Holdings became Mara? I'm not sure because I don't follow Riot that closely, but Riot nevertheless owns about 20% of Bitfarms. And there's this kind of like uneasy truce between the companies, right? The question becomes, what? Hey, is Riot serious? And if Riot's serious about really growing their operations, then Bitfarms and acquiring Bitfarms, I think is like the path of least resistance. It really is. And maybe little by little, slowly but surely, we can start to see consolidation sweep through the entire industry. We'll have 3 or 4, mega Bitcoin miners, maybe just 2 or 3, really. I'm saying 3 to 4, maybe it's just 2 or 3. And then all of a sudden, you have potentially a differentiated mechanism through which to gain, exposure to Bitcoin. Because at that point, you're not looking at a bazillion different mining companies. You're just looking at 2 or 3. And then there are some differences between those 2 or 3. Anyway, that's kind of my suggestion. I'm wondering what your suggestion might be. And I really mean this. Okay? I really want to know what you think that, is required for Bitfarms to attract more like capital towards itself so that irrespective of dilution, the share price has the potential to go up. Now, I get it. Nobody wants to just stand there and get diluted. I get that. So there's got to be the performance. There's got to be, right? Bitfarms has to deliver operationally and has to really, really, really ensure that this dilution leads to something that's more valuable, right, than the amount that's been diluted, so to speak. And that's on Bitfarms. But the flip side of that too is like, hey, look, there's got to be a compelling investment rationale for being involved with the company, being involved with the name. And as I said, look, it's a tough one. I do think if Riot and Bitfarms were one company, I think that's interesting. I think if then that consolidated enterprise, because by the way, then you'd have really Riot, you'd have Bitfarms, you'd have Stronghold, right? Maybe they want to roll up. I don't want to speculate too much, but just imagine them rolling up a couple more companies out there, right? Maybe that sets off a trend. Maybe some other larger Bitcoin mining companies want to start rolling up other entities. And we finally get some consolidation in the industry. We see a situation where we have economies of scale that are massive. I'm still waiting for a Bitcoin miner to acquire like a Canaan. Canaan is interesting because they make the machines. They actually mine with the machines. And I don't want to get too far afield here, but that's interesting, right? Hey, we make these machines. We use these machines. We mine Bitcoin. Again, what if you could do that at massive scale? That's interesting. So anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. I want to hear from you though. What can Bitfarms do, bottom line, to really help, kind of gather more attention, attract more investor capital, and perhaps even stem the tide of people throwing down their cards and saying, F it, there's better names out there. I'm getting out of this name. It's just not working out for me. You got to stop that. And you got to attract new investors. How do you do that? You let me know. Okay, my friend, hopefully that didn't sound too negative because it wasn't intended to sound negative, just asking. So let's stay positive, let's be great, and we'll see each other again tomorrow.